on his way. Devil is on his way. Devil is on his way, motherfucker. The devil gonna make you pay. Fall to your knees. Devil is on his way. Fall to your knees. Devil gonna make you pay. Fall to your knees. Devil is on his way.
Mountain Murders is an Appalachian true crime podcast. Some content may not be suitable for all listeners. Listener discretion is advised.
We say fuck a lot.
Hey, y'all. Welcome back to Mountain Murders.
I'm Heather.
And I'm Dylan.
Dylan, it is Super Bowl Sunday. Are you pumped?
I am. I have all kinds of snacks lining our counters in there. Our friend group is going to gather in one spot, and we're going to, bring all our snacks together. And I don't know. It's going to be incredible.
I hope both teams lose.
Wow.
Because all I care about is the snacks.
Snacks and commercials. And the commercials have fell off.
They're not as good.
They're not as good.
I have to admit, I'm kind of excited about Riri's halftime performance.
You know, I was actually thinking about what is she going to do?
Oh, man, I think we're going to get a lot of Illuminati symbolism. I think we're going to get some maybe apocalyptic images.
Whoa.
Riri as the Scarlet Woman.
Now,
and maybe some alien imagery.
You know, Jay-Z has his thumb squarely in this halftime shows, and Riri is one of his darlings. So this is why, what's going to happen?
Oh my gosh, there's going to be so much like occult symbolism.
Maybe the ground's going to open up, like the devil's going to come up.
Well, they have been shooting down all sorts of UFO objects this weekend.
Why do I feel like 2023 is trying to shine and outdo the previous shitty years?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Because all kinds of weird things are happening.
Yeah, so maybe Riri's performance, she's going to usher in the apocalypse on Beyonce's pale white horse.
Yes,
right?
Yes, I have
seen. So it'll be great.
Okay, so Heather has informed me we do not have time to tarry. We have a lot of story to get through, but I must thank today's sponsor, Emily, who is supporting us over on Patreon.com Mountain Murders.
That is /.com.
You say it.
It's Patreon.com, Dylan.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because all websites typically end with a dot something, like a .com.
Patreon.com /Mountain Murders.
Mountain Murders Podcast.
Emily found us, and you can too.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Just
Emily.
not Dylan. He can't find us over there. He's still struggling after all these years. Okay, you're right, Dylan. We do not have time to delay because we have one hell of a story. It is a fucking wild ride, and I could not spare a detail when it comes to this case.
So you had all this big story, and you trimmed it down as much as you could because it's just so wild and crazy. You have to tell us the whole story.
This could be like an 8-part podcast.
Oh my
For
gosh.
real. It is very intense. And I cannot wait to share it with listeners because when I started researching this, I was blown away. And it takes a lot to blow away true crime fans. You know what I'm saying? But this is one of those cases you're going to be like, what?
And in true Mountain Murder style, we're going to cram it all in one 2-hour show.
It's true. Okay, so June 25th, 1979. What were you doing, Dylan?
June 25th, 1979, I was about 1 year, 2 months old.
So you're probably just shitting your pants?
I was shitting my pants.
And sticking your foot in your mouth.
And nothing's changed.
Okay.
That's what I was doing this morning.
Yeah, I know. So it was a Monday, and Anita Bell's Ring My Bell was number 1 on the radio. And there was a failed attack on NATO commander and U.S. Secretary of State Alexander Haig in Belgium by a German terrorist. Something you probably haven't heard of, right?
No, because I was 1.
A few months earlier, the 3 Mile Island nuclear plant suffered a partial meltdown when nearly 140,000 residents had to flee the area. And in the city of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, folks were gearing up that morning for work when at 5:20 a.m., a radio dispatcher received a strange phone call. The caller had a slight Spanish accent, calling himself Larry Brown.
Which is a very Spanish name.
Right? Larry informed the dispatcher, quote, "There is a sick woman in a car in the parking lot of the Host Inn," before hanging up. Now, if you haven't guessed already, Dylan, the Host Inn is a motel.
Okay. I deduced that.
Within 10 minutes, officers with the Lower Swatara Township Police Department arrived at this motel, the Host Inn. Cruising around in their patrol car, nothing seemed out of place until they spotted a red Plymouth Horizon with its hatchback partially open. The officers, suspicious, stopped to look inside. In the car's hatchback area, a naked young woman was lying in a fetal position, knees up to her chest. Her head was bent forward. She had chain marks on her wrists and ankles. Bruises peppered the woman's back. She had black eyes and her teeth had torn through the lower lip. There was some kind of mucus, perhaps seminal fluid, dried around her nose and mouth. She had no pulse. The officers, this is very jarring to find.
Well, I mean, just imagine being a cop, and a lot of police work is kind of boring. You know, you're going around looking, making sure no one's into trouble.
Just driving and looking.
Checking around, sitting in your car and looking. Checking around businesses. You know, you see them doing it all the time. They drive around the back of the business, you know, do a little check. You usually have a little route they go. And then you see something out of the ordinary a bit, and you get out to check, and you're probably still sure it's just nothing. Somebody forgot, you know, the trunk lid open or whatever, and you make this startling discovery of this poor woman.
The officers phoned in, and a third patrolman joined them. He had actually made rounds through this very parking lot at 2 a.m., so just a few hours before. And he had seen this Plymouth with its opened hatchback and had done kind of a call-in to check the plates and find out the identity of the owner, which was Susan G. Reinert of Ardmore, Pennsylvania. The officer had gone inside the motel asking if she was a registered guest, and they had no record of the woman. But just as he's checking, an emergency call comes in regarding a fatal traffic accident. So the Plymouth Horizon had to, no pun intended, Dylan, take a back seat.
Oh, okay. So he got sidetracked by what he would consider a more serious call.
Yes.
And he just takes off to the call.
By now, the Host Inn was a full-blown crime scene. Investigators from the state's police criminal division had arrived along with the district attorney's office. The coroner was there beginning the processing of this crime scene. Evidence was bagged and sent to Harrisburg and Washington, D.C. for analysis. Inside the car, there was a church program, a Cub Scout pamphlet, some notes, playing cards, a map, a hairbrush, 3 stuffed animals, candy wrappers, and a few old soda, drink bottles. What was unusual was the lack of keys, purse, clothing, or items to help identify the victim. But they didn't need much information to aid in IDing this body. It was Susan Reinert. They also found a blue plastic comb with a U.S. Air Force insignia on it.
Okay.
Like a Air Force Reserves. It was like U.S. Aircom insignia on it. One thing that was found in the trunk of the car near the body disturbed investigators. A strap-on dildo, sex toy, had been located near the woman's naked body, as though someone wanted to disgrace her. This, along with the chain marks, felt sinister, bizarre, and left investigators uneasy.
Well, yeah, that's certainly something out of the ordinary. You typically don't see that outside of someone's bedroom or, their house, certainly. Most people don't travel around with these types of things. And it being right there with the body, I think that makes sense for them to think this is purely a humiliating thing for, whoever killed this woman.
Susan, they would learn, was an English teacher at Upper Marion High School in Mainline. Mainline was considered a hoity-toity suburb of Philadelphia, with sprawling estates and mansions, prep schools, and several academies and universities. So definitely a place where we're probably not living, Dylan.
Yeah, so if I lived
Hoity-toity.
in this area, I would not live in Mainline.
By 1:30 p.m., an autopsy was being performed on the body. The victim was approximately 35 years of age, weighing about 100 pounds. Rigor mortis was absent. She had bits of red and blue material in her hair, likely from a rug. The pathologist's findings were consistent with asphyxiation, yet officers felt this didn't offer much evidence. One of the detectives demanded a second autopsy and got on the phone to try to find someone who could come in and give them a second opinion.
Well, that's a bit odd to, kind of. They usually take the word of the local medical examiner coroner as gospel until they have a reason, to think otherwise. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Susan's ex-husband had not been ruled out as a suspect, and he was brought in to make the ID. Officers found Ken closing up at Fidelity Bank in Philadelphia. Ken Reinert was taken to Harrisburg. Though he was considered a suspect at the time, the husband always is, as you know, Ken seemed genuinely shocked to learn his ex-wife had been murdered. He even asked, "Are you sure?"
And these are normal types of responses cops get from someone, either who's done this, what happened, are you sure? Their brain won't allow them to think it's real, and they're really watching these first reactions when they inform someone that their loved one's dead.
Ken and Susan had been married 16 years before divorcing. Several years before, their marriage had been wonderful. Then Susan fell in love with another man and asked for the divorce. That was motive enough. Officers learned the lover's name was Bill Bradfield. When he asked about his children, Karen and Michael, the police gave no answers. Police then realized not only did they have a homicide on their hands, but 2 children were now missing.
I'd be so pissed if you left me for a guy named Bill Bradfield.
You would?
Yeah. I'll be wanting to punch that guy.
You just wait. When we get into discussing Bill Bradfield, you'll really be like, this putz.
How did I know?
Yeah.
Just by his name.
Not that you're disparaging any Bill Bradfields out there.
Oh, no. I love the Bradfield family. They're very good stock. But
they?
this particular Bradfield, I just somehow knew he was going to be a shitbird.
Then came the confusion with Susan's body. Somehow there was a communication breakdown between the hospital, the state police, the coroner, and mortuary. After fingerprinting Susan, someone authorized release to the funeral home, who, at the request of her next of kin, her brother, was cremated.
This is a really big mistake.
Police demanded to know how the hospital, quote, lost the body, to which they responded, what body? Chain of custody and proper release is key. And now investigators had 2 huge problems on their hands. No body and missing children.
So they can't get a second opinion on autopsy. This no body causes a lot of problems. And that's just a huge piece of evidence. I mean, honestly, that's their probably strongest evidence in this case is the body itself. And we don't know where the children are. This is very disturbing.
11-year-old Karen and 10-year-old Michael, where were they if not with mom and dad? A major search was underway. The state police's task force began an extensive search, working in teams day and night, scouring homes, schoolyards, cemeteries, wooded areas. As news spread, tips poured in from all over the country. People were digging in the backwoods of Chester County looking for graves. Backhoes were being used. Psychics joined the search. Then came the FBI.
Now, the only thing that could top this is if they had a psychic strapped to the front of a backhoe and were pointing them around in the woods. And they're just like with their arms out, like they're Jesus on the cross. And that'd be pretty cool. You think?
Yeah, sure. It's kind of like the guy in Mad Max who plays the
guitar
like on top of the in that latest Mad Max Fury Road movie.
That's exactly what was happening in my head. I didn't even want to bring Mad Max into it, but they have the psychic strapped up there and they're just like rushing across the tundra, and they're leading them to the children.
Yeah.
Because that's how psychics work.
Maybe the psychic has like a staff that he's pointing in the direction.
Why wouldn't
he or she like their dowsing rod
with a big glowing crystal in it?
This is where they are.
Okay.
Enough.
So they're rather quickly pulling out all the resources, all kinds of volunteers. It sounds like they're bringing in equipment. They're trying everything they can to find these missing children.
Right, and then the FBI gets involved. The lead investigator, a man named Van Noort, had not approved of the feds getting involved. He felt it was his case. He should make the calls. So we're already getting into a pissing contest between the agencies, which we know, Dylan, is never helpful to a case.
Never.
Everybody wants to lay claim to this case and the evidence, and it's going to be a mess. 18 FBI agents were assigned. Interpol was contacted. Finding the Reinert children was a top priority. Dozens of state police officers were tasked with assisting, yet nothing. The children had just seemed to vanish into thin air.
That seems like a strong response by the FBI. 18 agents. That seems like a lot of manpower thrown at this, which doesn't bother me, but it just seems like usually, you get a couple, 3 agents come in, on something like this.
The last time anyone had seen Susan or the kids was on Friday, June 22nd, 1979, around 9:15 p.m. It was 3 days before her body was found on Monday morning. Neighbors had seen Karen and Michael playing outside earlier in the evening, on this Friday evening. They lived on a quiet residential street. The next-door neighbor, an older lady named Mary Gove, had seen the children playing and recalled a thunderstorm had rolled in. Gove was standing at a window around 9:30 p.m. watching the storm when she had seen Susan and the 2 kids make a run for their car. Gove's teenage granddaughter had also witnessed the family leaving in a hurry. So watching a storm roll in.
That's something I would do.
Right? Big
Yeah.
thunderstorm, lightning, everything. And then you see this family, mom and the 2 kids rushing out in this rainstorm to get in a car. It's kind of an odd time to leave. Night.
Well, maybe they had to. Maybe
Storm.
they had something to do.
Well, Ken had last seen his children just before. There had been a father-son softball game hosted by the Cub Scouts. The game was held at a church. Susan had dropped her son off at the church but didn't stay for the game. After a few innings, there had been thunder, so the group went inside to resume a regular Cub Scouts meeting. Ken was supposed to take his son home, but was surprised when Susan showed up to gather him. Michael had been wearing a Phillies baseball t-shirt, jeans, and sneakers. Ken had caught a glimpse of Karen in the car. Susan had been wearing jeans, a striped shirt, and sandals. Around 8:45 p.m., Michael had phoned his father to apologize for leaving the way he did. He told Ken that he and Karen had to go with their mother, in which he heard Susan say, "We're just going to Parents Without Partners."
Oh, is that like a meeting or something?
Ken never heard from his kids again after that call. Yes, Parents at Partners is some sort of like support group that she was a member of. And they would have like overnight retreats and that kind of thing.
Okay.
Investigators quickly began believing that Ken was not a suspect. They had seen him react very emotionally to seeing Susan's body in the morgue, and the way he seemed distraught over his missing children. They just had gut feelings that Ken was not involved. The next person of interest was Susan's lover, William Sidney Bradfield, known as Bill. Bradfield was an English teacher also at Upper Merion, just like Susan. He had a big beard and was articulate, intelligent, and just chocked full of charisma, Dylan. Investigators would come to call him Rasputin
Oh my gosh.
because he was so tall and had this big beard.
Nice.
Everybody seemed to love Bill. Another reason why they called him Rasputin, because not only everybody loved Bill, from students to faculty, but especially the ladies loved Bill.
Wow.
He seemed to have some sort of magic spell he could cast over women.
So, Bill's Rasputin and ladies are the royal family of Russia.
Yes.
And Bill can do no wrong in their eyes.
Well, Rasputin was quite the stud muffin when he was hanging out.
Yeah.
Like, the ladies loved Rasputin.
Yes. He was well endowed, they say, as well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yes. It was kept in a jar after his death.
I heard that.
Yes.
Rasputin was also reportedly very smelly and never showered.
Yeah, I don't see how those two things work out together. To be stinky but a ladies' man.
I'm not sure, but somebody out there likes a good stanky jungle. As investigators questioned Susan's colleagues, friends, and neighbors, Bill's name just kept coming up. Nearly everyone agreed that Susan seemed to be spellbound, enamored with Bill from the moment she met him. After all, Bill had managed to dismantle her 16-year marriage. What seemed to be a completely happy marriage.
Oh my gosh.
Yet there was another person of interest besides Bill, and that was his live-in girlfriend and fiance, a woman named Sue Myers, who also taught at Upper Marion High School.
Man, there's a lot of drama going on at this
Could
high
be like
school.
a soap opera.
Yeah.
Now we have ourselves in a love triangle. 47-year-old Bill had met Sue Myers in the fall of 1963 when she had taken a teaching job at the school. For the past 6 years, since 1973, Sue and Bill had lived together near the Reinert household, even through the marriage and the breakup of Susan's marriage, like Bill and Sue were living at a pretty close distance to her.
Huh. Why doesn't that surprise me?
And as you can imagine, Dylan, Susan and Sue did not get along. Investigators learned that on 3 separate occasions, Sue had confronted Susan on school grounds, having called her a bitch and a whore.
What is this? Why you never have these types of relationships at work?
Fraternization.
Yeah, because
It's not okay.
it goes south, and
It's
then
messy.
now your work's being affected.
On one occasion, Sue had physically kicked Susan in Bill's company. Sue was jealous that Susan and Bill had become involved, and Sue felt Bill was her property. She had him first, and she was going to marry him. At the time of Susan's murder, Sue and Bill were still living together and still planning to be married. The tangled webs we weave.
You got to be, I've said this before, you got to be mad at your partner. That's who should get all your anger and kicked in the shin is your partner, not the other. You know, sometimes these people always concentrate on the other person that they're cheating with. But if your partner's willing to do this and doesn't respect you or your relationship, they're going to do it with somebody. It doesn't matter who, right?
Well, Bill Bradford was also dipping his pole in other waters, Dylan. During the summer of 1978, he had begun a relationship with a former student named Wendy Ziegler. They had spoken of marriage, and Wendy was convinced that she would be Mrs. Bradfield. 20-year-old Wendy was a student at California College. She had already begun planning a wedding in her Catholic church and had even spoken to her priest about the possibility of an annulment between Bill and his second wife. She wrote him passionate love letters.
Why do I feel like Bill's been to the free clinic before to get some penicillin?
Bill Bradfield had never actually been officially married. There were more like, these marriages he had were more like common law marriages. Bill called them spiritual marriages.
Nice.
Bill had 3 sons from these 2 spiritual marriages before he met Sue Myers. Yet Bill had one more woman in his life who also wanted to be Mrs. Bradfield. Her name was Joanne Aitken, a graduate student at Harvard. Aitken had met Bill around the same time as Susan Reinert when she had come to Upper Marion from St. John's College in Maryland to recruit students. Aitken had been director of admissions there, and she also wrote Bill these very flowery love letters. So he's just getting like love letters from all these women.
So not only, it does seem like he has some kind of a, spell over these ladies. It's not like they don't just see him. It's like they're mesmerized with him. All these flowery letters, love letters, and this stuff. So, yeah.
Well, one thing was for certain. Bill Bradfield had it, whatever it was. It led women to adore him immeasurably with intense passion. Have you ever had this problem, Dylan?
All the time. All the time. I can't even, say hi in public to a woman. Next thing you know, she's in my bushes trying to, see who's coming in and out of my house.
Like the Russian spy balloon or the Chinese spy balloon or whatever it was.
Oh, my
That's
gosh.
trying to sneak a peek at you, too.
No, I've never had this problem. And I'm not a cheater. So, if I have a woman, that's my woman. That's who I'm with. I don't allow anything to flower or start to grow.
You're not trying to water any seeds.
I nip it in the bud. As soon as they try to be slick with me, I let them know real quick. I'm a happily married man, and there's just absolutely no way that you can replace my wife, who I truly love.
I almost believe you.
It's the truth.
I almost believe you, Dylan.
It's the truth.
You have a lot of sincerity.
Wow.
Behind that.
I thought it was indigestion.
Well, there's that too. Susan's friend Donna, a next door neighbor, told detectives she had seen Susan at 6 p.m. on her porch Friday evening. The pair discussed Susan taking the children to Allentown for a weekend retreat of parents without partners. Susan had worried whether she had enough gas to make it. There was an odd gas shortage happening. So it was like some people could go, I guess, on odd days and even days.
Oh, yes.
To
This
get
is
gas.
late.
This was at the height of the
Yeah.
gas shortage.
This is late 70s. Yes, a very big situation happening with, if I'm not mistaken, it was the Iran hostage situation, which was in turn causing a gas shortage because we were like, cut it out, Iran.
Well, Susan was worried she might get stuck in Allentown. Susan spoke of upcoming plans. She had to be back. She was like, I have to be back before Monday because Michael was going to be baptized and Karen was going to gymnastics camp. Susan and Donna had also planned a garage sale the following Saturday to get rid of some junk. The women had been friends since 1977, and Donna often watched Michael and Karen each morning when Susan left for work. The kids also checked in with her every afternoon when they arrived home from school. She described Michael and Karen as regular kids, full of energy, though Karen was more reserved and a bit shy. Susan was a great mother who never seemed to tire of busing the kids from after-school activities like baseball, Cub Scouts, and gymnastics. Susan beamed with pride when discussing her children's successes and was very hands-on as a mother, despite mostly doing it alone. Donna didn't think highly of Bill Bradfield. She said aside from the children, Susan was obsessed with Bill. He was the center of her universe. Donna had reservations and didn't know what his intentions had been with Susan. Sue and Bill had owned a store together. It was like an arts and crafts kind of store. Susan had told Donna that she was madly in love with Bill, but he had dumped her for another woman named Sue, and they lived together. Bill had not been honest with Susan about his relationship with Sue, and they had ended things. Susan had tried dating other men. Then Susan's mother died. She inherited money, and that's when Bill suddenly popped back into the picture.
Oh, come on, Bill. She wasn't good enough till she had an inheritance, right?
Now, this is coming from Donna. According to Donna, he was at Susan's house constantly. Then all of a sudden, Susan asked Donna and her husband to witness her new will. Donna thought it was strange because only a few months before, they had witnessed another will Susan had laid out, which put her brother Pat as trustee. Donna didn't read the will, but assumed maybe she was making Bill trustee now. Since it was personal, Donna didn't feel like she needed to read it.
Yeah, and I could see that. It's I'm your friend. You obviously we're close enough friends. You're asking me to, be a witness on your will. Pretty big deal. And but you're not going to pick through someone's will. That's their living will and testament. It's really none of your business, right?
Donna had witnessed what seemed to be some kind of altercation between Bill and Susan in late May. Bill left the house in a hurry and Susan followed out, calling his name until she realized other neighbors were watching. She appeared upset as though she had been crying. Donna recalled another incident in which Karen had come home from her brother's baseball game, but the door was locked, and they never locked doors at this house. Karen had climbed in a window and then came out rushing from the home, screaming as though something bad had happened.
Oh my gosh.
There was a real terror in her voice, said Donna. She knew Mr. Bradfield was in the house at the time because she had seen him go inside earlier, but Donna had no idea what the young girl had witnessed. Was it something violent? Was it like some kind of kinky sex game? I mean, who knows?
So she she gets in the house because it's locked and she can't get in, and just almost instantly comes running back outside making a scene. And could you imagine this other scene where she runs out screaming Bill's name loud enough and for long enough for neighbors to come out looking like what the hell's going on? What would you think of neighbors doing things of this nature?
I mean, we've had some pretty dramatic neighbors, so
I would get some popcorn.
probably.
I'll be like, they're at it again, baby.
I know I love other people's drama. I don't want drama, but I like to watch other people's drama. it's almost like slightly comforting.
Yeah.
'Cause it's like it's a reminder of like my dysfunctional childhood.
Well, you're just like, I'm doing pretty good. It kind of validates
Yeah.
your life and makes you feel better about
Yeah,
yourself.
like I'm glad that we're not standing outside in our underwear screaming at each other or whatever. Yeah. According to Bill Bradfield, he was not in love with Susan Reinert. He never intended to marry her and was not engaged in a sexual relationship with Susan. Bill said Susan was infatuated with him and began writing him letters proclaiming her love for him, suggesting they should get married, saying he was the only one she would ever love. During the summer of 1975, according to Bill, he spent the summer in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Susan badgered him all summer, writing love letters. Then the next summer, she did it again. The summer of 1976, Bill was living in New York City with another woman studying graduate level Latin at NYU. Bill Bradfield described it as the most intense classical language course he had ever taken, and it was all-consuming. Then one weekend, he got a call from Susan, who was in a New York City motel, begging him to come see her.
This is not healthy for Susan to keep doing this to herself. It's a shame.
He told her he was too busy with schoolwork. She called him obsessively until he placed the phone off the hook. She would tell him that without Bill, there was no point to life. She would stop eating and would vomit. He said she came to school with bruises on her face, just randomly. And he'd be like, "What's wrong with you?" And she wouldn't tell him.
I would personally be worried if I was Bill in this situation. Besides the sounding like he can't keep it in his pants, this is obsessive behavior, and it's scary. It can turn very dangerous.
In 1977, Bill had begun building this arts and crafts store with Sue Myers, so he wasn't available to spend time with Susan. Then in 1978, Bill was studying in Annapolis, Maryland. Susan showed up there as she had in New York City. Bill said he refused to take her calls. At one point, Susan left a copy of her will in his mailbox, making him the guardian of her children. But he says he had no idea she had any kind of like a life insurance policy or will or monies that were supposed to go to him.
So, is this supposed to, okay, that would weird me out. I'm sorry. Like if I had this woman who was obsessing over me, I was trying not to give her the attention back, trying to keep it cool. And then she leaves me a copy of her will in my mailbox, making me the guardian of her children.
I know.
Now, this hasn't
I was
improved.
just going to say, if you're trying to get to Dylan's heart, the way to do it is not to be like, "Here, I'm going to leave you some kids to take care of."
I was going to say, this is not helping your standing in my eyes. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to insist that I'm not the guardian of your children if something was to happen to you.
Yeah, I mean, Dylan's like done parenting.
I got extra kids right now.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get rid of them.
Yeah, Dylan's ready to just have some freedom.
Yeah.
He wants to just be pop
Now,
and see a grandbaby like every, couple of days and not have full-time parental responsibilities.
that's a very good, clear description of what I am trying to do. Now, if you were to leave me say a 6-pack of craft beer in the mailbox, now we're starting to warm up. Now I'm considering maybe we should hang out Saturday night.
But the children, that's not the gift.
No,
That's not the
no.
gift you're after.
Craft beer and some high quality edibles. Now we're on the path to love. Now I can give this a chance.
Some chicken wings.
Yeah, not guardianship.
Right? With some blue cheese. Not some ranch, but blue cheese.
You're making me hungry.
You leave a dozen wings in the mailbox for him. Now that might work as well.
Yes.
See, I know you, baby.
These are the paths that you can walk into my heart. It's not your kids.
See, I know.
It's not guardianship of your kids.
I know the way to your heart
You do.
is through your chest. Bill said when he first met Susan, he really liked her. But over the years, he realized Susan was just too much. She was obsessed. She wrote letters, which he called, quote, adolescent pornographic descriptions. When Susan's mother died, she began insisting that Bill marry her. He claims he told her they were friends only and that they were not dating. Bill offered to help her when he could with babysitting or stuff around the house, but insists they were not together. He said Susan would ask, quote, "Can we at least go to the movies together?" And Bill would tell her no. During school hours, Susan would write as many as 5 notes a day, having her students deliver these notes to Bill's classroom while he's teaching.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That's inappropriate.
Yeah. Trust, when you find out more about this Upper Marion High School, it's like a fucking Peyton place, Dylan. She would call him constantly, begging to see him. He described Susan as needy. When she would call crying, he would show up at her house. She'd been in a house coat sometimes. The rooms would be a total mess, disaster, not clean. Bill says he would offer to help her clean up, and she would whine and say the house wasn't her problem. She just needed a hug. He would kind of like hug her, and he says she would latch on to him like for dear life and would say they should live together. I can make you so happy. But Bill claims he would tell her, quote, I don't feel that way about you, Susan. I'm your friend.
Okay. So according to Bill, it's all Susan. He's trying to basically keep her off of him.
Yes.
But still trying to be her friend. Not completely blocking her out of his life.
Yes.
Which is a tricky, if that's truly the case, that's a hard path to walk, you know, when you have someone who wants to have this next level relationship with you so badly, but you don't want that at all.
Well, see, you just can't do that.
You can't do, yeah, you can't.
You can't give someone who exhibits this kind of behavior and has an obsession, they're the kind of people you really can't give them an inch because they'll take a mile.
They read something into everything.
Yes, so there's just no kindness. You have to be very firm. I'm not interested and not have contact with them. Because it's like any tiny bit of kindness, friendship, whatever you try to convey to this person, they're going to take it the wrong way.
So when they call up in the middle of the night or whatever, acting kind of hysterical, you probably shouldn't show up at their house.
Exactly.
Because that's what they want.
Right.
And this is, if this is true, by the way, I don't know. This is Bill's version.
Oh, you just wait.
I don't want to victim blame or put words in anyone's mouth. I'm just along for the ride.
Oh, I'm telling you this story. Yet a man named Vince Velatus said that Bill had been predicting Susan's murder for months. He had laughed it kind of off, ignoring this bizarre scenario that Bill had laid out for him. So when Sue Myers informed this guy Vince that Susan had been murdered, Vince thought he needed to speak to Bill immediately. And by the way, Vince also is a teacher at Upper Marion High School.
This guy's got 2 V initials?
Vince Velatus.
Interesting.
Yeah. So he's like, I got to speak to Bill immediately. He knew that Bill had been right. Dr. J. Smith, principal at Upper Marion High School, had finally done it. He had finally killed Susan. What? Scooby-Doo, what?
What the hell?
Yeah.
What's he got to do with it? Yeah, okay.
I'm telling you, this story is all over the place.
Yeah.
Stick with me.
I bet.
It's gonna make sense soon enough.
The police are like, what the hell?
Now, Vince had heard rumors that Bill was having an affair with Susan. Yet when he asked his good friend about it, Bill denied it. Bill told him he had no interest in Susan romantically and had never had sex with her. Bill would tell Vince that Susan was needy, desperate, and just had this multitude of problems. She was a woman who really needed help. Vince lived in an apartment in the same building as Bill and Sue. Seems like it was some sort of like big kind of old house converted into apartments. They often had dinner together, and as I mentioned before, I mean, they're really good friends. They work together, the 3 of them. They live in the same building. They spend a lot of time together. In the months before Susan had been murdered, Bill was hardly home at night. Before, Bill had been gracious, avidly interested in literature. During their hangouts, Bill was very interested in what Vince had to say. They discussed Ezra Pound, ancient Greece, and Shakespeare. Yet in the months before Susan died, Bill was never there, and when he did show up at his friend's apartment, he looked exhausted. He would say he had spent the whole evening trying to control Dr. J. Smith. Bill had told him he and a substitute teacher friend named Chris Pappas were planning to go to St. John's College in Santa Fe for summer graduate school. Vince had been relieved. Vince was happy that his friend would be working toward his master's degree, but he also knew that Bill just needed a break or like a change of scenery. On the same day that Bill had left for New Mexico was the same day that Jay Smith had been sent to prison for theft, and also the same day that Susan was found dead. What a turn of events.
What a coinky dink.
Bill called him in New Mexico, or called him from New Mexico. Someone had already informed him of Susan's murder, and he told Vince, "Do not talk to police and do not mention Dr. Smith. If you do, you'll put me in the electric chair."
Okay.
Now let's talk a little bit about Dr. J. Smith.
Now, I wouldn't be comfortable with anyone telling me what to say to police. That would make me curious very, very quickly.
Now, Dr. J. Smith, he was born June 5th, 1928 in Chester, Pennsylvania. He had 5 brothers and 1 sister. His father worked a very blue-collar job in shipbuilding and at a dry dock company. They lived with his grandparents in a multi-generational household. His grandfather had been a chair caner, a lost art, so Jay grew up learning to make chairs. His family were fundamentalist Christians who attended a Methodist church. Jay was really into church and sang in the choir. He had been a newsboy. Then when WW2 broke out, World War II obviously, he was too young to go fight in the war. So at 17, he ended up enlisting in the National Guard. Then at 18, went to the regular army. For 20 months, Jay Smith was stationed in Japan, though he never saw combat. By 1978, Jay Smith had made rank to colonel in the Army Reserves, having graduated from the National Defense University. He went to all the military schools, General Staff College, the War College, Officers and Infantry School, and his whole goal was to become a general in the Army Reserves. Aside from being an educator and school administrator, the military had become Jay Smith's life. Now, Dr. J. Smith, who had been a high school principal for dozens of years at Upper Marion High School, had been a very private man. No one knew of his private life, not if he was married or had children.
So they just didn't know much about him.
He was secretive. Smith had been friends with General John Eisenhower, the son of President Eisenhower, and they had often carpooled to Valley Forge for their weekend reserve duty together. Though he described Smith as a loner, Eisenhower knew him to be an excellent administrative officer who oozed intelligence and had a, quote, sardonic sense of humor. In 1978, Dr. J. Smith sent shockwaves through the community. He was spotted at a shopping center wearing a dark hood over his face, holding a gun in each hand. He walked toward a parked van, and people began calling the police, who happened to arrive moments later. When they found Dr. J. Smith, he had 3 loaded guns in his possession. He told police he was looking for his daughter and son-in-law, and we're going to get to that story soon enough.
Oh, my God.
But at the time, he had no license to carry these weapons, so he was arrested.
Yeah, it sounds like he's about to wild out to me.
Now, at the police station, an officer overheard Smith on the telephone directing someone to remove everything from the basement, especially the, quote, filing cabinet. 2 officers were dispatched to his home, and they watched a strange man hurriedly carrying out items. He made 5 or 6 trips inside the house and brought items back and put them in the trunk of his car. The man claimed he was a friend of Smith. And when asked, he told the officers, well, you don't have a search warrant. Because they were like, what are you doing?
Right.
What you got there? This man told them everything in the car belonged to Dr. Smith. He had only done what he was asked to do, and that the gun permit was in the house, Dr. Smith's gun permit, but he just couldn't find it. Well, in the trunk, these police officers find army manuals, 3 paintings that belonged to the high school, a file box with 2 white plastic bags, which held about 1 pound of marijuana. This man was arrested and given a $50,000 bond. This little friend of his. Smith's car was processed, and detectives found an arsenal of weapons. There were cartridges for an array of guns like a high-speed Mohawk, cartridges for a .22 caliber, military raincoat. They found white gloves, black garbage bags, bolt cutter. I mean, it looked like a criminal's stash inside Dr. Smith's car.
This is some strange stuff.
Very strange.
Now, all they would overhear me telling my friend calling from jail is to clear my browser history.
I'm afraid what you are looking at then.
My browser history is very clean. That was just a joke.
Inside Smith's house, they found 17 bottles of pills, more marijuana, silencers, and a full Brink security guard uniform with an ID card for a Carl S. Williams featuring none other than Dr. J. Smith in the picture.
Wow, so he has full-on fake credentials for security guard, the whole costume, all these weapons, drugs. What would you be thinking if you were finding all this stuff?
What the hell? This guy's a high school principal?
Yeah.
While Dr. Smith sat in jail, detectives were rapidly building evidence against him for a number of cold cases. In December of 1977, $100,000 in cash was stolen in a security guard robbery from a Sears store in Abington, Pennsylvania. Another store in St. David's had $34,000 in checks stolen, along with $19,000 in cash. In both cases, a guy wearing a Brink security guard uniform made the pickups. Among the items seized from Dr. Smith's home was pornography. And not just any pornography, Dylan, but like specialty pornography, some of it featuring bestiality.
Oh, wow.
A lot of like hardcore BDSM porn.
Yeah, I gotta guess bestiality is on the outside fringes of, it's pretty niche, would you not say?
Yeah.
I mean, that's, I don't know.
That's a no for me.
I don't know any, of course, a lot of people might not admit they're into this, but I don't know anyone that's into bestiality. Hey, and if you are, more power to you as long as the animals consent. Yeah.
No, that's just a big no. I
No.
draw the line.
You draw the line?
I draw the line.
You draw the line at bestiality?
Yeah.
Is it the consent from the animals that stops
There's
you?
just no part of that is okay by my standards. I'm sorry.
What if you teach an animal to hit a button that is giving consent, like those little pads you put on the floor? No? Okay.
I'm just not buying it,
It's just
Dylan.
not working.
I'm just quit asking me. My answer will never change. I'm going to die on this hill.
Would you stop loving me if I admitted that I was into bestiality?
Yes, I would
Okay.
divorce your ass.
Okay.
So is this your way of like admitting to me something?
Okay, I'm just going to, okay, James, go clear my browsing history now before we finish recording. Thanks. But no, I'm not into that.
Ooh.
What?
Now I'm repulsed by you, okay?
No, I brought the bit all the way around. That was good.
I'm repulsed, and I'm taking our dog, and we're leaving.
Oh, don't you dare take Rufus. I love that dog.
You have like a whole
I
new...
love that dog.
Ah, what is wrong with you?
I'm sorry. Let's get back to it. It's out
You're
of
not
control.
okay. Other people don't think you're okay either.
Okay.
See, what a freak. This is why I'm mean to him on the podcast, because this is the kind of shit he says.
It's not real.
How do I know?
Let's move forward.
Smith would later deny the pornography was his, pointing to his daughter Stephanie. Stephanie was a heroin addict who was heavily involved in prostitution. He also tried to blame this pornography on his son-in-law, Eddie. Smith claims between 1975 and 1978, he was working on a pamphlet about homosexuality and how to prevent it in children.
Oh.
So he needed all this research material?
And so in this day and age, this is going to be physical media.
Yes.
It's going to be
It's like magazines.
magazines, possibly VHSs. No, not
70s. No, this would be like
not even
old
VHSs.
films.
Yeah.
Like the 16 or 8 millimeter films.
Oh, gosh. So you just have all this physical media, this very dark, disturbing stuff. And honestly, that doesn't make sense that it's someone else's, because people not into that don't want this kind of stuff laying around.
Well, there had been rumors at Upper Marion High School that Smith was having sex with his staff members, which he adamantly denied. Bill Bradfield had told people as much. Smith would later say the sexual accusations were part of a widespread smear campaign to make him look guilty, like a bad guy. There was even suggestion that Smith might be part of a sex cult or a satanic sex cult. Not the satanic sex cult.
Oh, my gosh.
And that he'd had orgies with students and staff. You know, all this talk about like satanic sex cults since I was a child in the 80s, and never once have I been invited to participate in one.
You've never had an offer.
And I just don't think that's fair. Okay, so if you have a satanic sex cult out there, break a bitch off an invitation.
Just a
Come on
sex
now.
cult, a little boring, a little last year. A satanic sex cult?
Yeah.
Now you got
You
her
got
attention.
some like Sam Smith style, like cage and some hot red devils dancing around. Like, why are you not calling me? I'm your girl. Okay, I'll bring snacks. When Smith was arrested, the community was outraged. How was this man leading a double life? How had he been a school administrator for all these years around their children? Bill Bradfield was the only person who did not abandon Dr. Smith. Instead, Bill stayed in touch, wrote letters, and offered to send him books or help any way he could. Smith raised his bail within a week and was released. Bill visited him at home. Smith seemed very upset, obviously. And Bill would later say that, you know, he was just on this tirade. How could they do this to me? They've ruined my life. Not at all owning up to the fact that, no, you kind of did this to yourself.
Now, wait a second. Now, when you first start the story out, we're talking about Bill and Sue and Susan and all this and a little bit of philandering. And you're like, wow, this must be the craziest stuff happening in this school. And then you start talking about the principal, and it's like a freaking movie.
Just wait. We got more.
Jeez Louise.
So Bill is telling his buddy Vince, the neighbor, fellow teacher, right?
Double V.
That there was just no way that Dr. Smith could have been involved in that store robbery at Sears because he had seen him on that day at the shore. A few months later, around November, Bill confided in his friend Vince again, saying Smith had confessed to him that he was a mafia hitman who'd killed many people.
Okay.
So Dr. Smith, this colonel in the army, school administrator, also a hitman for the mafia.
It's all just a cover.
And that he kept a list of people who didn't deserve to live, Dr. Smith, and added that one of the persons on that list was none other than Susan Reinert. Again, in the winter and spring, Bill told his friend, Vince, he thought Susan might be murdered by Dr. Smith. Vince thought either Bill was insane or that Dr. Smith was truly some kind of a madman. One of Susan's friends had called Bill in New Mexico. So fast forward, Susan's been killed. Bill's in New Mexico doing his graduate work.
Yeah, I just happened to have to leave town right after she's
the day
found.
she's found.
Yes.
Exactly. So one of Susan's friends calls Bill in New Mexico about the tragedy. He tells the friend, you know, I've already heard about Susan. She asked when he planned to see Susan again. And he was like, well, I'd planned to see her maybe in September when I returned from graduate school. And, you know, high school started again, our teaching jobs. However, Susan had told this friend that she and Bill were being married in July in England. Bill acted surprised and said no, he had never agreed to that. Susan had been pushing him to travel to England, but he had told her they were not getting married, and instead he was going to be spending his entire summer in New Mexico. The friend noted how strangely Bill acted when she asked about the children. Bill spoke about them using the past tense as if he already knew they were dead. He pretended not to know much despite the fact that the friend had seen him interact with Karen in a loving manner. So he's like, I don't know where her kids are, and then is just acting like he doesn't even know the kids when this woman has seen him around the children and has seen him interacting with Karen. She would sit on his lap. She would hug him.
So he's basically like, why in the world would I know? I'm the last person
Yes.
that would know where the kids are or what's happening in Susan's life. Okay.
Detectives traveled to Cape May, New Jersey, and found a boarding house where Bill Bradford, Sue Myers, Vince, and a guy named Chris Pappas had spent the weekend of Susan's murder. Bill was known to the owner as he'd stayed in this house, this like boarding house, a number of times. Bill had paid for 2 rooms, but asked for a receipt showing 4 days of rental. It was the first time he'd ever made a reservation, which the owner thought was strange because Bill always just sort of showed up and got a room.
Yeah.
But he's claiming, well, I'm making a reservation because I have 4 people with me. And I didn't just want to show up with 4 people.
Wants to make sure they can get a room.
Yes. By now, Bill Bradford had lawyered up and was refusing to answer any questions about the trip or the receipts. He had arrived with his friend group Saturday morning, but had requested that the owner give him a receipt for Friday night.
Oh, he arrived on Friday morning?
Saturday morning.
Saturday morning. He wants a receipt from the day before?
Yes.
Well, that's weird.
And if you remember, Susan was last seen Friday night and discovered on Monday morning. So by Thursday, after Susan's body has been found, remember she's found on Monday morning, by Thursday, detectives had gotten a call from New York Life Insurance Company regarding short-term policies. According to information they had, Susan had purchased policies totaling $750,000, money of which would be paid out to a William Bradfield, and she had written intended husband on the policy, and he was sole beneficiary. Was this a motive?
So, upwards of almost $1 million in life insurance, which is a big old chunk of change back then. And he claims to know nothing about a life insurance policy.
Knows nothing.
Right.
Susan's funeral was held at Mainline Unitarian Church in Devon, Pennsylvania. People were surprised that Susan's fiancé, Bill Bradfield, had not returned from New Mexico to attend the service. Because remember, Susan's telling everybody she's engaged to Bill. During the service, Vince asked another friend if they could talk, explaining that he had information but couldn't go to the police. This friend, who was also like a colleague at the high school, told him, I don't want to know, and don't speak to me about it again. If you want to tell somebody, you tell police.
So he's like, I don't want to get involved.
I don't want any involvement in anything you might be willing to tell me.
Now, could you imagine the cooler talk at this daggum high school?
Gosh.
Between the whatever relationships, and then Bill, the principal, all his story, Mr. Smith, is that right?
Yeah, Dr. Smith.
Dr. Smith. Could you imagine the gossip in this school? This is some juicy stuff.
Vince drove to his church and spoke with a priest after Susan's funeral. The priest advised Vince that all of Bill's stories were hearsay, and the best thing to do was encourage Bill to speak with law enforcement instead. Like, all these stories that Bill has told you about Dr. Smith, about Susan Reinert being on Smith's kill list, that for months, all these stories that Dr. Smith is planning to kill Susan, and then it's going to happen anytime. That's all just hearsay. You need to get Bill to go tell police because he has firsthand knowledge.
Okay. Well,
and what you've got here is just gossip.
Some rather sound advice from the priest. And the priest is basically like, I don't want to hear this.
Yeah.
Can you get the hell out of my confessional and go tell the police?
Yeah. Can you just confess something like you stole your Nana's medicine or something?
Yeah.
Like, I don't need to hear. I don't need to hear all this.
Stole your Nana's Vicodin. Come on, man.
When Vince called Bill in New Mexico, he said maybe it wasn't Dr. Smith. Then he told Vince that Susan had dated a black man named Alex. Maybe it was him who had killed her.
Oh, yeah. I forgot to mention the black guy named Alex.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, police are interviewing all these people. As you know, this investigation's in full swing. Another faculty member divulges this information, recalling back in 1975 having an emotional conversation with Susan Reinert regarding Bill's relationship with Sue Myers. Susan was devastated that Bill was moving in with Sue, despite the fact that Susan was still married. So Susan's married, she's not yet divorced, and she's just all to hell because Bill's moving in with another woman.
So it sounds like in her mind, my marriage is ending and I want to be with Bill.
Yes.
And she's trying to make all that happen. But now Bill's shacked up with another woman.
Rumors began back in 1974 that Bill and Sue were living together, and they'd actually been living together since 1973. But it had taken until 1974 for word to kind of spread at school that they may be living together.
Yeah, they always show up to work together and leave together and in the same car. It's very weird.
The same friend had later driven Bill home after work and confronted him about Susan. Bill informed this coworker that he didn't love either Sue. He's like, I don't love Susan. I don't love Sue. Then he tried to kiss this woman and said, I want to know you inside and out. The coworkers scoffed at his advances, then told Susan Reinert about them. Bill denied this ever happened.
Bill's gross.
Yeah.
Like, for real.
He is. After this, Bill and Susan were on and off mostly off. And then in March of 1979, Susan inherited money and land from her mother. Susan confided that Bill had finally proposed marriage. That's what she's telling everybody. Susan stated that she had actually given Bill her mother's diamond ring so that he could propose to her.
Okay.
So he's not going to buy me a ring, but I'm going to give him my mother's ring so he can give that to me. I mean, this just, it's really pathetic.
Does
not
that
to
reeks
victim
of
blame
desperation?
Susan, but like, she's got some problems.
Well, she does.
She needs some help.
She really does, and it doesn't seem like there's anyone in her life she can really kind of slow her down and make her take a step back and think about the children. Is this the healthiest thing for you? But we were talking the other day about sometimes people will like go out of the country seeking love, and then they'll sometimes these women, especially for some reason, will bring a ring with them just in case the guy wants to propose, and I'm just like, that's kind of gross.
That's not
how it's supposed to work.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And if that's what you're having to do, well, I mean, I can't speak on everyone's situation, but it seems like a lot.
Right.
Yeah.
So not only did Susan give Bill this diamond ring, like, here, I'm going to give this to you. So when you decide to propose, you can give me this ring.
And then she'll act surprised like she's never seen the ring,
Right?
even though it's been in her family for 100 years.
But she also gave him some money to invest for them. Her friend asked why she hadn't invested the money for herself, and Susan said that Bill had offered to match the investment. The friend called the police concerned about this alleged $25,000 that Susan had given Bill and a diamond ring that she had also given. So after Susan's dead, this friend is like, look, she gave Bill a diamond ring and $25,000.
Which is a lot of money.
Especially in 1979.
Yeah.
It's a lot of money. Before Susan's murder, now if you remember, he had this another little friend named Joanne Aitken, the Harvard grad student.
Ah, yes. Man, you have to take notes on this story.
I'm
to
telling you.
keep up with who's
It's
what.
true.
Who's Bill screwing next.
That's why I'm trying to give everybody reminders about who all these players are. Before Susan's murder, Joanne Aitken had come to Philadelphia and registered at a cheap hotel under the name Mrs. William Bradfield. This was like a day or so before the weekend that Susan would be killed. So if you remember, Dylan, Joanne had worked as like an admissions director at St. John's College in Annapolis, Maryland. And she had met Bill, like bringing her college to the school to try to recruit students.
Right.
They'll have like those recruitment days and that kind of thing. Well, after she had met him, Bill would bring groups of students to her college for a visit, and they would start spending time together. This is how they became a thing. Joanne quickly fell in love with him, and as the years passed with distance between them, Joanne felt as if she couldn't survive without Bill. Her loneliness was too much to bear. She drove Bill and his friend Chris to the airport on June 25th, the morning that Susan's body was found, to see them off to New Mexico, because she just can't bear to be without him.
Bill, man, he's got that magic.
He got something.
He's got the X factor.
The plan was that Joanne would take them to the airport, then she was going to drive Bill's Volkswagen across the country to New Mexico and spend the summer with him. So he's got Sue Myers at home that he lives with, his fiance.
Okay.
But he's going to be living with this other woman
While he's
during
in
the
New
summer
Mexico.
for his grad program.
Well, yeah, when you go on a trip, you always bring an extra woman along. You never know
He's
what
got hosts in different area codes.
Ludacris was singing about, rapping about Bill. Honestly, I think he inspired that song.
It's true. I think so. In New Mexico, Bill quickly impressed his professors. The two became fast friends, especially the one, the one main professor he had. They're just best buddies. While he's in New Mexico, after the murder is taking place, Joanne frequently would join the class. She would sit in as well, even though she wasn't a graduate student. She would just come sit in the classroom.
And she's there staying with Bill.
Yes.
Okay.
It's almost like she came to just sit so she could watch Bill.
She's probably trying to make sure that he's not picking up any other women.
She wanted to watch his big brain in action. The professor, his wife, Bill and Joanne would sit together in the cafeteria for long periods discussing philosophical questions. The professor noticed that Bill never spoke of his life in Pennsylvania or about the friend who had been murdered.
The day he came here, found out his close friend who he was personally connected with was murdered and found in this very, disturbing state inside of a car. And he just doesn't even mention it. I would find that very, very strange.
This professor also noticed that Bill spent long hours on the phone in the hallway speaking in whispers to someone. But July 4th, homicide detectives flew to Albuquerque to interview Bill. Now, Bill stated that his attorney had advised him not to answer questions, but written ones could be submitted to his lawyer. His friend Chris Pappas and Sue Myers were also being represented by the same law firm. Angry, detectives went back to the New Mexico State Police Office, and they typed up a series of questions. There were 12 in total. At the time, Chris Pappa's attorney said he didn't think there were any problems with these questions because Bill's lawyer was out of town. So these detectives call the lawyer's office, and they're like, we've typed up these 12 questions to give your client. Read the questions. Well, his lawyer's out of town, but this other attorney who works in the office that's representing the friend says, I don't see anything wrong with these questions. He can go ahead and answer those. Yet Chris Pappas didn't want to cooperate. And he called the lawyer's office reporting that he called the lawyer's office and then told the police, well, I'm not going to answer these because I'm now being represented by Bill's attorney, not this guy who says that we can answer these questions.
Oh, wow.
The guy who's out of town.
Okay. It's funny how that all of a sudden
Just
changed.
sort of skirting that they've been given permission to answer these questions.
Yeah.
Just anything they can do to not have to be honest with police.
Or cooperate in any way, because you obviously don't seem to care about your friend's murder being solved.
Yeah.
If you hadn't, I understand to a degree getting a lawyer. We've talked about this before. You can get, especially if you're a spouse or something like this, which, they're trying to connect Bill intimately with Susan, the victim. But getting a lawyer doesn't automatically, in my mind, mean guilty, because you have to be careful. If you have a group of investigators who truly think you might be the suspect, and you can get railroaded. They can start getting tunnel vision on you and not consider evidence that, points towards someone else. Just, they're cherry picking things just to fit their narrative. But at some point, even through your lawyer, you need to cooperate. I mean, I see the need for a lawyer in some instances, but just no cooperation, total refusal to answer any questions at all. That, I think, is a red flag, personally.
Oh, yeah. And that's totally what's happening here. And so when these cops come back and they're like, look, the lawyer has given us permission to ask you these questions.
We're submitting the questions through the lawyer.
Yeah, we're giving them to you. We want you to answer these. Bill became very angry, and he told investigators when he had time, he would have these questions reviewed by his attorney. But at present, his studies were most important. I'm here to get my master's degree. I am not here to help you solve a murder, Dylan.
Damn it.
This guy. It was July 7th when Bill learned about the insurance money. A reporter called to ask him about it. Bill told the reporter he couldn't comment on the case, but the money should be used for the safe return of Susan's children, who by now are, missing, and they're still like this top priority for law enforcement is finding these kids.
Oh my gosh, I keep forgetting about the missing children.
When reporters learned the salacious news, somehow, that a, quote, big strap-on dildo had been found in Susan's car, they went wild. They linked Susan to a bizarre sex ring, calling it a love cult. 3 individuals said there were 20 to 30 participants in swinger sessions that included homosexual and sadomasochistic acts.
This is inappropriate. I mean, this is Even if she was part of some, swinging sex club, that's really her business. And I think that's just horrible for them to latch on to something like this where it could have been intended to embarrass and humiliate the victim anyway. So they're just completing that job.
Well, I think it just goes to show that the press is going to take any like, whoa, that's a salacious story and run with it.
It's yellow journalism. It's never died.
We know that that's what they do. So one police officer spoke anonymously to reporters, suggesting that Susan was killed because she threatened to expose the group who were, quote, all professionals. Other reporters suggested theories that Susan was killed as part of a satanic ritual sacrifice. The New York Post suggested Susan's murder was part of a black mass, with it being filmed like a snuff film to be distributed underground.
Wow, thanks, Post, for keeping it real professional there.
And if you remember, Dr. Smith had been caught with strange pornography, and investigators wondered if this theory had any legs. Yet, what had happened to Susan's children, and what did they have to do with any of this?
Well, they were the sacrifices in the sex cult, the satanic sex cult.
A criminal informant reported that Dr. Smith, had gone for frequent visits to a swinger's house in Quakertown. A prostitute came forward to discuss her meetings with Dr. Smith, which took place in August of 1978. Allegedly, Dr. Smith had given her $800 to open a massage business. He wanted to be a partial owner and told her not to worry about investment capital. He had lots of money. Well, yeah, he's been robbing banks.
Yeah.
Or businesses, sorry. He's been robbing the Brinks security, right? Dr. Smith's wife, Stephanie, a redhead in her 40s, had died of cancer on August 10th of 1979. She was a witness giving her husband the alibi that he'd been in Ocean City, New Jersey at the time of the Sears robbery. Stephanie had refused to speak about her husband publicly. Yet, judging from friends, they said Jay Smith might have been a private person, but not his wife, Stephanie. She would blab about her personal life to anyone who would listen. Stephanie was a little unusual herself. She was always threatening to leave Jay, at one point even hiring a divorce attorney, and she handed over this lawyer a piece of evidence, which was, quote, a large dildo. Now, why that would come up in a divorce proceeding, I don't know, but she turned it over to the lawyer and was like, this is some evidence, you can use it against him.
Yes, sir, Your Honor. My client would like to submit Exhibit D into evidence. It is a very large dildo.
The ram bone.
Is that what it was called? Or did you name it that?
No, I've seen one that was named that.
Oh my!
I was very impressed with the name. I was like, that's super creative. But it was also the most frightening thing I've ever seen in a store.
My goodness. So it was, okay.
Look, I saw it when I was very young, and it left like in my 20s, like one of the first times I ever went into like an adult store.
You were in there tee-heeing with your friends?
Exactly. I remember that because it left a mark on me.
This can happen.
This thing, I was like, what the? Oh my God. And it was called the ram bone. And then beside it was the hand of Adonis. That was equally as large, and it was a hand.
Yeah.
I mean, we can guess what that's for.
That's different.
Yeah. And both of those things like scarred me. I was just like, what?
The ram bone in the hand of Adonis?
Yes.
Okay.
I will never forget those items.
How am I get the look in your eye right now? You've really gone back to that moment.
No, it was jarring. It was unnerving. It did something to me. I needed to leave immediately. I was like afraid.
Okay.
Now we have to talk a little bit about his wife, because he has a wife, Stephanie, and he also has a daughter named Stephanie.
Okay.
So we're going to talk more about the daughter in a little bit, but let's talk about his wife. So she's like very open, blabs to everybody about how much she hates her husband.
This is Dr. Smith.
Yes. And he's super private. People don't even know he's married or that he has kids. And then his wife's just like, let me tell you about this motherfucker, right? Now, this is in the 70s, like 1979, Dylan. She still wears like white go-go boots and micro mini skirts, which hadn't been stylish for over a decade. So she's still dressing like it's the swinging 60s.
Yeah.
Like some chick out of an Austin Powers movie, right? She wore her hair dyed red, like super bright red. Like she was very eye-catching at the time. And she wore it kind of spiked up. I mean, she just was like not at all what people expected this very quiet, conservative Dr. Smith to be married to. In contrast to like his appearance, she's just like his polar opposite. So they're a very strange couple. After Dr. Smith's arrest, Stephanie had told a reporter that in 27 years of marriage, she really didn't know her husband at all because he'd always been so secretive and private. Dr. Smith had sent her a letter to the hospital. Now, he's in jail while his wife's in the hospital dying with cancer. And he's talking about how they need to clean out their house completely in this letter.
Okay.
Like, we have to get rid of all the things in the house. So in her diary, police find some entries about Jay talking about how he's a swinger and how he hated his family. He called them rats and vultures and that he made threats to kill them.
Oh, maybe that's just his love language.
His children, he called his daughters rats and vultures.
Yeah.
Stephanie wrote that Bill wanted to kill his daughters, Stephanie and Sherry, and that he told everybody in the family they were rotten and they ruined his chances of being a school superintendent. He wanted Stephanie dead because she knew of his, quote, fucking and mail fraud.
That's an odd combination.
Yeah.
Mail fraud and fucking.
Yes.
Or what if you're committing mail fraud to do some fucking?
Maybe.
I mean, that right there is how the FBI gets involved.
Their daughters were troubled girls from a troubled home. The younger Stephanie had been a student at Upper Marion, but only for a brief period. It was known she was a drug user. She was a heroin addict, and she dropped out of school. Then Stephanie, the daughter, married another drug user named Eddie Hunsberger. On February 28th of 1978, this was the last time that anybody ever saw Stephanie and Eddie alive. So his daughter, Dr. J. Smith's daughter, Stephanie, and her husband just vanished.
Really?
In 1978. After a nationwide search, law enforcement concluded that the daughter and son-in-law were presumed dead. Eddie's parents insisted that Dr. J. Smith was responsible, and they have still never been found.
There's just weird stuff connected all around this story.
You know what I mean? Weird.
It's like if you took even any one of these cases would be a story in its own. Any one of these groups of people.
Yeah. So during one search of Dr. Smith's house, another letter was found, and it was tucked inside a graduation card that detailed a very graphic sexual encounter that he had had with a New Jersey school principal, this woman he had been having an affair with since 1974. So there was this nagging sexual element to the crime because dildos keep popping up around Dr. J. Smith.
No puns intended.
There had been one at the crime scene in the back of the car, but this was still circumstantial evidence in the murder of Susan Reinert.
Right.
So we've got apparently, dildos. He likes a dildo, likes a big dildo. His wife's taken one to a lawyer. There's these letters and diary entries that talk about all of the sexual stuff.
There's a strange pornography, or what they would consider strange. I imagine it's like when the investigators are searching any place connected to this case. It's like a Jack in the Box, but it's a dildo pops out whenever they open a box up, and right on the lips.
Bill Bradfield preyed upon certain types of women. They were lonely, shy, and insecure. All of them were only modestly attractive. Some might even call them homely. And they spent their time in classrooms, either as teachers or students. Most of the women led sheltered lives in a cocoon of poetry, music, art, kind of fantasy worlds. And they were like very vulnerable women.
I know exactly the play Bill uses with them.
You do?
Yeah. He just tells them everything they want to hear, the stuff they've never gotten from someone else, how beautiful they are, how much he loves them. He just woos them. And I think that's why they get such a strong, he treats them like a man never has, even though it sounds like he's just to get whatever he can from them. But then that leaves a mark on them, And
yeah,
that
he like recites some T.S. Eliot, and then they're just like in love with him.
Right.
Yeah. Dylan, there's one thing that no one will ever accuse you of, and that is wooing a woman.
That's right.
There's no woo in your body.
No. I use the brute force attack, known to be used by some hackers. I just, eventually they just cave in just to make me be quiet.
That's not true. But Dylan has no idea how to woo a woman.
So what is my secret sauce then? Is it my authenticity? Is it my genuineness? Is it my, dare I say, sexual prowess? Was that a snort?
It's all the things, Dylan.
It's all those things? Okay.
Bill Bradfield seemed to be much more controlling and manipulative than he appeared. Though he had multiple relationships with women, they were not based on sex alone. The relationships seemed to be more beneficial for Bradfield as he used the women. Just like the weekend on the shore when Susan Reinert was murdered, it was Bill's friends who acted as his alibi. So again, it's not like he's on the shore with Sue Meyer because he is madly in love with her. It's
right.
because he knows she's going to give him an alibi.
Right.
As summer turned to fall, there were still no signs of the Reinert children. Due to multiple agency involvement, there was miscommunication and evidence misplaced or lost altogether. After the fiasco with Susan's remains, when no proper forensic examination could take place, the case seemed to be at a standstill. When detectives wanted to recall the 911 tape and listen to the caller's voice, they met another dead end. What tape? The original 911 call had been erased, and like Susan's body, was gone forever.
Why?
Detectives decided on another motive for murder. One that was as old as time, Dylan. Money. And following the money led them back to Bill Bradfield's door. I don't want to call him Bradford. Susan's mother had died, as I mentioned before, leaving her $30,000 in cash and about $200,000 in property near Ridgeway, Pennsylvania. On May 4th of 1979, Susan named Bill as the beneficiary. Then, of course, there was the matter of the $750,000 life insurance policy. With Susan and the children out of the picture, Bill would be sitting pretty. For the next 15 months, detectives combed over every scrap of paperwork at Reinert's Woodcrest Avenue home. It didn't offer up any clues about violence or bloodshed or the location of the children, but it did paint a picture of grand theft by Rasputin himself, Bradfield.
Really? See, I forgot. If the children were in the picture, likely they would be beneficiaries of her estate. So, it looks like possibly Bill needed all of them out of the way to get all the money.
In February of 1979, Susan withdrew $25,000 from Continental Bank, insisting on cash, not a cashier's check. She even told bank officials who were resistant to make these large withdrawals. Susan said, well, he will only accept cash, which was something that the bank managers had remembered because there was such a large sum of money that she was withdrawing and that she kept referring to a he.
Well, yeah, I would expect a withdrawal of that amount would stick out in your head. You'd remember that for quite some time.
However, the safe deposit box holding the $25,000 wasn't in Bill's name, but rather his girlfriend, Wendy Ziegler. Ziegler was a woman willing to hold out for a long time for the man she loved. She was a tough nut to crack, as they say. On Friday, I'm getting confused. It's such a long story. On Friday, June 22nd, 1979, Bradfield handed Wendy $25,000 in cash, asking her to hold on to it in case Dr. J. Smith murdered Susan Reinert. Now, this is the Friday that Susan is last seen alive.
Really?
It gives this other woman $25,000 in cash and is like, you need to hold on to this in case Susan gets murdered.
Dude, I'd double cross old Bill and I'd just take off with that money.
Bill explained to his girlfriend Wendy that somehow his assets might get frozen because he was Susan's beneficiary. Now, but he's claiming he didn't know anything about this money.
Oh, but he's
telling this other woman, I'm her beneficiary, so they could freeze my assets if something happens to her.
Wow. Okay. That's a pretty big bombshell there.
On that evening, he dropped Wendy off at her friend's house around 8 p.m., then was unaccounted for until about 11 p.m. Susan and her children were last seen alive at 9:20 p.m. that evening at their residence. At 11 p.m., Bradfield returned to meet Sue Myers and his friend Vince. He seemed upset and irritated, hurried them up in packing, and then went to pick up their friend Chris. On the trip out to Cape May, because remember they're going out to New Jersey on this very late Friday night, Bradfield confided in Vince once again that Dr. J. Smith was going to kill Susan Reinert. He claimed that evening that he had followed Jay to Susan's house. Dr. J. Smith allegedly circled the street 14 different times and only lost Smith when a hailstorm started. So he had only lost this man in this residential neighborhood because of hailstorm.
So he's so worried about Dr. J. Smith killing Susan that he's actually following him around.
This is according to Bill.
Okay.
Now, during the trip, Bill Bradfield asked his friend Chris Pappas to call Wendy Ziegler and see if anything newsworthy had happened. Pappas took that to mean if Susan Reinert had been killed, yet she had not yet. Bradfield insisted on getting receipts for everything while they were in Cape May, which was also something that his friends noticed because it was just really odd. He never did this.
Right. Buy a candy bar at a convenience store, I need a receipt. It's almost like he's making sure he has a paper trail to prove where he's at. Now,
some years passed, Dylan, and they're still working this cold case, still trying to find these kids, still gathering evidence. The case just is not really going anywhere. 24 full-time people, including FBI, state troopers, and local police, had worked on the case as like a task force. So it was 3 years later. They have no arrests, and the FBI ends up pulling out, calling the case unsolvable.
Well, yeah, they didn't start out too great by, losing the body, essentially, your biggest piece of evidence.
Then, police discover a bombshell. They find a fake certificate of deposit typed on an IBM Select 2 typewriter Gothic Ball. It's like a Gothic Ball typewriter, signed by two men who didn't exist among Susan's papers. But guess who owned that particular typewriter?
Bill.
Yes. Police handed this over to the lawyer handling Susan's estate. July 15th, Susan's 6-month phony certificate investment was supposed to come due. So just after she was killed, this certificate's supposed to come due.
So this was the proof Bill could give Susan to show her about her investment?
Yes.
Okay.
Dr. J. Smith was going to jail for his other crimes and would no longer be useful to Bill Bradfield because he couldn't kill Susan from jail. Susan was expecting a summer marriage in England, if you remember. So Bill Bradfield was feeling pressure. He only had a few choices. He could marry Susan, he could kill Susan, or he could break it off and return the $25,000.
Yeah, and as seemingly obsessive Susan was with Bill, I don't think she was just telling everyone they were going to get married in England. I don't think she made that up. I think he was feeding her bullshit lines and telling her that he will do these things with her because she keeps going the step further, giving him money, large sums of money to invest. So, yeah.
Now, at this point, we've got motive, but only circumstantial evidence and theories. And I know what you're thinking. You're like, damn, Heather, this is a whole lot of story to end it this way. But hold on a minute. I got you. Just stick with me.
But wait,
there's more. Okay. So back to Dr. Smith's missing daughter.
Okay.
So we're kind of all, I know we are, but
No,
eventually
but
it's
it's a lot.
all going to make sense.
Okay.
Police speculated that perhaps the Reinert children were with this missing daughter, Stephanie Hunsberger. An anonymous call came in suggesting police look behind the White House with 6 pillars, where they hold their cult meetings. Well, now Bill Bradfield's apartment building, this old house that he lived in, had 6 columns. And the caller had also mentioned some old schoolhouse. Well, they took an aerial photograph of this apartment building, and there was the old Diamond Rock schoolhouse not far off from this apartment.
Really?
Yes. So police began a search there. They had 9 different officers out shoveling dirt. They were digging all over this property for shallow graves. But still no sign of the kids. At the start of the new school year, So just after Susan's killed, we're going back a little bit in time here. The start of the new school year, as you can imagine, parents were furious that Dr. Smith had been arrested. He had been sentenced. Then they had the murder of Susan Reinert. There were all these rumors of misconduct sexually among these staff members.
Yeah.
Sue, Bill, Vince, and Chris were all reassigned to other positions outside of Upper Marion High School where they were not allowed to have any kind of contact with students.
So they broke up the gang.
They broke up the gang. By now, Susan's estate attorney, he had summoned Bill Bradfield to testify about this money because police had gone to the attorney. They handed over this certificate of deposit that's totally fake. So this estate attorney is like, you're going to have to come talk to me. We're going to have a hearing about this. Bill didn't know the smoking gun that police had, that they had this fake investment certificate, and he didn't know how much the police knew about this money. They had kept that pretty quiet. So it was during this estate hearing that Bill damaged himself forever. It would all be on record and set the stage for his future. Bill claimed he had no idea about this money, how much money Susan had inherited, and he had no idea there was a paper trail from the bank withdrawing cash, or that Susan had made little notations every time she had withdrawn money. Like on the withdrawal slip, 4B, or she would write Bill on the deposit slip.
Nice.
So he didn't know any of that. He stated that Susan never gave him any money to invest. Bill claimed that he owned this typewriter brand, but he had never ever seen this investment certificate before.
Okay, so again, Bill knows nothing about nothing.
I don't know. Just nothing.
And he just keeps being tied up knee deep in this shit, but he just has no clue as to why. He doesn't know why Susan thinks they're going to get married in England and is telling everybody that'll listen that he's her fiance.
He's her man.
Or telling people that I gave him this this large chunk of my inheritance to invest for us. Bill's just has no clue.
He has no idea.
I feel bad for Bill. He keeps being drawn into this somehow.
Bradfield had not only let go the chance to return the money Susan had given him, but he locked himself into a story that is now on record.
Yes.
Detectives felt confident they would be able to eventually uncover Bradfield's possession of the cash. Bradfield's financial status was not good. He was deeply in debt. His store was going bankrupt.
And I'm sure this is what the investigators had in mind when they made sure the estate attorney got this certificate and was going to bring him in, depose him. I don't know if it was official testimony or what, but
It was like some kind of probate kind of hearing.
You're getting him sworn in. You're getting him on the record. And it gives you somewhere to start because Bill hasn't cooperated any at all, hardly, with them. He doesn't want to talk to them. He doesn't want to discuss anything with them. Now he's on the record. Very smart.
Then Bill's friend Chris Pappas came forward to police with information that Bill had confided in him about having a large sum of cash in the spring of 1979 and that he needed to hide this money from Sue Myers. Pappas told investigators that Bill had 6 envelopes, which happened to be the number of times Susan had withdrawn money from her bank account in order to get the $25,000 out.
The ones with the B's or the bills next to them. Okay.
And that Bill had kept these 6 envelopes hidden in the trunk of his father's Cadillac, which Bill had.
It was totally normal.
This fancy Cadillac.
Many people, instead of the bank, they use their trunk of their father's Cadillac to hide their cash.
Yeah, so Sue couldn't find it.
This is totally normal behavior.
Bill had asked Chris Pappas to inquire about a phony loan from his father and brother, and that Bill would pay them in cash in exchange for checks to be written in these specific amounts to cover the group's legal fees.
He's trying to launder the money.
He's trying to launder the money.
Damn, Bill.
Bill didn't want his attorney to know he had $25,000 in cash. He also was holding onto parts of a gun and some acid that Bill claimed belonged to Dr. J. Smith.
Parts of a gun and some acid.
Yeah.
Okay, not suspicious.
No.
It's very, very normal.
Well, you don't hang out with your friends and they're like, hey, take these gun parts.
These gun, which I'm going to assume are probably the parts that mark the bullet, maybe
I mean,
the
I
barrel.
know that I'm always like, hey, girl, that top's cute. Can I borrow that? Oh, yeah, by the way, can you hold on to these gun parts for me?
Can you hold on to the barrel, this barrel of this gun and this firing pin? Just, I'll let you know when I need it
I
back.
got a little acid.
And by the
Can you
way,
stash it for me?
here's some acid. Be careful with that. It will eat your face off.
Bradfield told his friend that Dr. J. Smith would cut up bodies, pour acid on them, wrap them in out-of-town newspapers, then tinfoil, then trash bags.
Out-of-town newspapers.
Because remember, Dr. J. Smith is a hitman for the mafia.
So he's not going to use the local newspaper.
Allegedly.
So if these acidic bodies wrapped in newspaper and tinfoil,
then people will think
are discovered.
Oh, they're from Jacksonville, Florida.
They're from the Omaha Ledger, apparently.
Henrietta, Oklahoma. Allegedly, Smith had liked using a .22 caliber with a silencer. He felt it was the best for assassinations because it made less noise and the bullet traveled slower. Dr. Smith, according to Bill, had liked to put chains on people's wrists in order to suspend them and cause pain. Bill explained that Dr. J. Smith wanted to beat and torture Susan Reinert before he killed her. Bill had given Chris Papa's items to stash in case anything were to happen to Dr. J. Smith, including 2 small locks, a ski mask, 2 boxes of .30 caliber ammunition, and some kind of listening device.
Okay.
Now these belong to my boss at the school, but can you hang on to these?
Now, did I miss in this story, or why would Dr. J. Smith want to kill? He just hated Susan? Is that the gist of it, basically?
Yeah. That she was just a person he put on his list as somebody who deserved to die.
Okay.
He just didn't like her for whatever reason. So at this point, law enforcement knows they can likely find a little more information charging Bill with the theft of $25,000. So
Right.
This is the first step in bringing Bill down. Sue Myers spoke to investigators, finally breaking her silence about the sudden strange behavior of Bill in the months leading up to Susan's murder. Bill was rarely home at night, always explaining that he was helping Dr. Smith with his court case or trying to talk him out of murdering Susan Reinert.
Please don't do it, Dr. Smith. Please. I know that you're a trained assassin for the mafia, apparently, and an educator.
And a colonel in the Army Reserves.
And a colonel in the Army Reserve. I want to be general of the Army Reserves. But just please don't kill Susan, because I don't love her at all, but I just don't want you to do it.
It's just...
Because I have her stolen money. And
right.
as you can see,
there's no reason to kill her, right?
this could cause me issues in the future.
In early 1981, Bill was finally arrested on those theft charges. Wendy Ziegler was also charged as a co-conspirator. Before the criminal trial could begin, it was announced that $36,000 of Susan's estate would be used to pay for investigations into the whereabouts of her children. The funds would also be used to contest the will so that Bill couldn't get a dime from her estate. Prosecutors were able to finally connect the missing funds and Bill's remarkably similar amount of cash. After a 5-day trial, the jury deliberated for an hour and a half before finding Bill guilty of theft. The max sentence was 7 years with a $15,000 restitution bill. But Bill still had a possible murder charge looming over his head. So we got him for the money. Now we're going to get him for the murder.
Okay.
By now, Bill was unable to make claims on Susan's life insurance policy. Susan's brother Patrick, her legal next of kin, placed the money into a trust for the Reinert children, although they were still missing. A grand jury was convened in 1982. Many had already given testimony in the theft trial, including Dr. J. Smith, who was serving a 7 to 16-year prison sentence for the burglaries or the robberies of those Sears stores.
Yeah, from
right?
the armed robberies.
Yeah.
Because he had all the stuff used in the armed robberies.
In addition to questioning Dr. Smith about the Reinert case, investigators and prosecutors asked about his missing daughter and son-in-law. Now, in 1978, Dr. Smith told police that Stephanie and Eddie had gone to California fearing blowback from drug dealers they'd ripped off. Dr. Smith had cashed his daughter's welfare checks, which were used to buy narcotics after she had gone missing for like an extended period of time.
Who keeps cashing their missing daughter's money of any kind?
Dr. Smith? I mean, this guy.
Well, it's like those people that, are connected to someone who's getting Social Security and then they disappear and they keep depositing their Social Security checks. Normal people don't do that.
There was little law enforcement could do, but they suspected Dr. Smith knew more about his missing daughter than he was letting on. How can you not punish him for committing fraud if he's cashing these checks?
I know, right?
That's my question. It had been long theorized by investigators working the case that Bill Bradford had hired Dr. J. Smith as a hitman. The two schemed to murder Susan, dispose of her children so that Bradfield could collect the inheritance and life insurance policies. Then these monies could possibly be transferred to Smith as a payoff. So, hey, if you help me with this, after all is said and done, I'm going to break you off a piece of this money.
Yeah, I just need you to kill this woman and get rid of her 2 kids.
Yeah.
If you don't mind.
Then at the end of 1982, a tip came in about the children's bodies being stashed in the trunk of a Lincoln, which was located in a quarry in Chester County, Pennsylvania. The quarry revealed multiple cars, including the Lincoln, but there were no sign of the children's bodies.
Isn't it odd how you have these abandoned quarries and oftentimes they fill with water because they're pumping the water out. And a lot of times cars end up pushed in these quarries.
Yeah.
Anytime they search one of these for evidence pertaining to a certain case, they always find more cars and possibly bodies.
It was on the morning of April 6, 1983, that Bill was finally arrested. Now, at this point, he had been released from prison for the theft the year before and charged with 3 counts of murder, along with conspiracy to commit murder, kidnapping, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, and obstructing justice. Based on the evidence, the grand jury, which had been impaneled for the last year, decided that based on the evidence they had, Bill was responsible for the murders and the children were likely dead because by this point they've been missing for 4 years.
So they've been technically, officially claimed dead or however that works, Sometimes people do this when someone's missing for years so they can
Well, not yet.
settle. They're not?
Not yet.
They're assuming they're dead?
Yeah.
Okay.
So they've got this grand jury that's been convened and has been impaneled for over a year. So they keep coming back, returning to the jury with more and more evidence. And then they finally bring charges against Bill. But because the children have been missing for so long, almost unanimously, this grand jury agrees the children are likely dead.
And I think that's a safe assumption, honestly.
The indictment alleged that Dr. Smith had planned to kill Susan Reinert, and Bill had done nothing to stop him. Bill conspired to let Dr. J. Smith carry out the killings for his financial gain, yet no charges were brought against J. Smith at this time. An inmate named Noel had been incarcerated alongside Bradfield at Delaware County Prison at Broad Meadows. He said during a chess game, Bill admitted to his involvement, stating he had been present when Susan and her kids were killed. Noel didn't get anything out of testifying. He said he had 2 children and felt it was the right thing to do coming forward with this information.
So he's not seeking time off his sentence or anything like that. He just wants this information to be known.
Yes. Bill indicated at the time that if he had not needed this money, Susan and her kids would be alive. He said none of the plan involved killing the children. It was Susan only. But the situation changed. The children were a byproduct, and it was never an intention to have them killed too. This is what he told this jailhouse informant.
Okay.
No witnesses, including his many mistresses, could account for Bill's whereabouts on the night of Susan's murder until 11 p.m. on that Friday night. Now, if you remember, she was last seen around 9. So from about 8 until 11, no one can say where Bill was.
Out of the 12 mistresses and girlfriends.
Now, remember, he's claiming he's following Dr. J. Smith around, who's circling Susan's house like 14 times.
Right, because he's so concerned.
Yes.
He's so concerned, and all these years he has not cooperated with investigators.
Prosecutors also bring up the fact that Joanne Aikens, one of his lovers, had used Bill's name to check into a hotel in Philadelphia, which creates somewhat of an alibi for him.
So they know that she checked in under his name even though he wasn't present.
Yes.
Okay, well, that's weird.
Then he was leaving for Cape May with friends after 11 p.m. But there's still like this 3-hour period of time. He had dropped off Wendy Ziegler after giving her this large sum of money at a friend's house. 3 hours go by. Then he's going out of town. So he had 3 whole hours.
And Wendy, in turn, opened a safety deposit box in her name and put the cash in there.
Yes. His friends had discussed Bill's remorse all weekend for Susan's death, though there was no actual news report on any crime or that she had been killed. But all of his friends agreed that Bill spent the entire weekend talking about poor Susan and just this awful thing that had happened to her.
And so she went missing Friday night
Yes.
once they looked into it, but wasn't discovered until
Monday morning.
Monday morning. But the entire weekend, he's moping around talking about how sad he is that Susan's dead.
Yes, and if you
Oh.
recall, Bill asked his friend Chris Pappas, will you call Wendy Ziegler and ask her if anything newsworthy happened?
Okay. Now
And
we're getting
Chris
to it.
took that to mean, has Susan been killed?
Well, yeah, who asked someone to call home and check and see if any hot news has happened? You know, nobody talks like that.
Bill insisted on receipts and established alibis with his friends. It wasn't until his conviction on those theft charges that his 3 friends began to worry of their complicity and began cooperating with investigators. When Sue Myers spoke to police, Bill grew very frustrated and started making physical threats against her.
He doesn't want this.
No. Though there was no physical evidence linking Bill to Susan's murder or that of her children, the prosecution felt they had built an airtight case against Bradfield. By 1983, Bill could no longer afford the services of his former attorney and would likely get pushed to a public defender. After pushing back hearings, Bill obtained new counsel, which happened to be a public defender, and entered a not guilty plea. The judge on the case had overseen the grand jury, so a request was made to change judges, and it worked. A new trial judge was granted. Witness testimony would be the primary evidence for prosecution. So that's tricky. Like the whole case built on witness testimony.
That is tricky, but after a certain point, I guess in the prosecutor's eyes, is all these little tidbits are so odd that they can connect Bill to. They think it, paints kind of a picture that he definitely had a hand in Susan's death and the children's disappearance. And I think it's a good call on their part, honestly, in this case.
One of their first witnesses was Mary Gove, Susan's neighbor, and she was able to establish a long-term relationship between Susan and Bill. She was also the last person to see Susan, Michael, and Karen alive on the night of June 22nd, 1979. Others backed up Mary's account of the relationship, citing how head over heels Susan had been for Bill. It made Bill's declarations there had been no romantic relationship even more confusing. Noel, the inmate, the jailhouse informant, took the stand to recount what Bill had said about being present when Susan and the children were murdered. Noel reiterated he was not getting any type of deal out of testifying, that he just felt compelled because it was the right thing to do. Now, I should note, Dylan, that Noel was accused of murdering his girlfriend some years later.
Okay.
So, But, I mean, maybe he's telling the truth, right?
Well, he could be. Just because he's in jail for committing crimes doesn't automatically make him a liar. No different than if he was, if they said he was a drug user, or anytime that someone's a woman said to be a prostitute, she's instantly, her character's, under question.
Right. So he's going to testify about a guy killing a woman, and then some years later, he's going to go on and murder his girlfriend, because it's the right thing to do, Dylan.
Well,
Anywho.
yeah. But in the moment, It would be hard. The defense, your first inclination about a jailhouse informant is they're doing this to get some advantage for themselves, be it time off, better circumstances in jail, better environment.
Right.
But if
He's not
if
getting
he's
anything
not
out of
getting
it.
any of that, that kind of makes it hard to argue against this guy. Why is this guy getting involved?
I know. I just thought I would point out the fact that, he was a shipbird too.
Well, yeah.
Another inmate testified that Bradfield made statements about wanting to have some of the state witnesses killed and was asking around, like, do you know anyone I could pay to kill some of these witnesses?
Do you know anyone who's in jail here with us that is in for assassination? Because I really just need a good, solid hitman that conducts himself in a professional manner and is very discreet.
Have you tried Craigslist?
I have tried Craigslist, and all I found was a $2,200 Honda Civic and some guy that wants a meetup.
An undercover cop.
Yeah.
Yeah. The defense called many colleagues and former students from Upper Marion High School, including love interests, to speak on Bill's behalf about what an amazing man he was. Vince and Sue were called to testify on his behalf, both seemingly throwing blame at Dr. J. Smith's feet. Yet Sue Myers also noted back in 1974 and 1975 that Bill had written in a diary his desire to murder Susan Reinert for insurance money. Something she had read in his diary.
What? Man, come on, dude.
Dr. J. Smith, who was a planned witness for the defense, was not called to the stand at the last minute. Bill's lawyer feared that the loose cannon might say something outrageous on the stand.
Well, and honestly, everything that's been connected to Dr. J. Smith, I mean, it wouldn't be too hard to kind of throw his credibility into question.
Well, here's the deal. Dr. Smith had refused to meet with the legal team on each side. He didn't want to meet with the prosecution or the defense leading up to the trial. He told the judge he refused to make any legal deals on either side and would only deliver an unfiltered version of the truth. Of course, the jurors were eager to hear what he had to say. So, of course, not hearing from him seemed like kind of a panic move on behalf of the defense. So it seems like, they're afraid he's going to tell that Bill was involved.
Wow. So actually, you've created a situation that you kind of can't win with the jury, right? With this odd character who's done all these strange things, not bringing him on possibly could have caused you more issue with the jurors than actually letting him testify.
October 28th of 1983, the case was handed over to the jury. It took only 90 minutes to learn Bill Bradfield's fate. Bill was found guilty.
Guilty.
This would earn him the death penalty or life in prison. Jurors would later say they had no debate on Bill's guilt and likened him to Charles Manson, a charismatic cult leader who manipulated those around him.
Oh, yes. And Charles Manson would be very fresh in their minds at this point.
Bill was given a life sentence for each murder. He appealed, but the consecutive sentences stood. However, the case was far from closed. There was a co-conspirator who had carried out the murders. Then there was the issue of Karen and Michael's bodies, which had yet to be recovered. There had been a few things to link to Smith, like those rug fibers that were found in Susan's hair, and a comb that was found in the car with like his Army Air Force, like this unit on it.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about the comb. That would connect that could connect back to Bill, right? I mean, Dr. Smith.
Yeah. There was also circumstantial evidence, like where Dr. Smith had been at the time of the murders. Dr. Smith would continue denying any involvement in the case, but after Bill's trial, the public's eyes shifted to him. Another grand jury was called in February of 1983, but Dr. Smith would exercise his Fifth Amendment right, unwilling to answer questions. In January of 1984, Bill was brought in to testify. Those transcripts have not been made public.
Wow.
The transcripts from Dr. J. Smith's grand jury hearing. Many speculate it included information about Stephanie and Eddie Hunsberger's disappearance and his involvement. June 25th of 1985, 6 years after Susan's body was discovered, Dr. J. Smith was finally arrested. The case was almost identical to that of Bill Bradfield. Why do I call him Bradford? Including 2 jailhouse informants who said Smith confessed to, quote, killing that bitch. In all, 110 pieces of evidence and 90 witnesses were presented. So that's quite a bit of evidence.
Yeah.
Quite a few witnesses. After 6 hours of deliberations, the jury agreed he was guilty in April of 1986. Due to a book written by Joseph Wambaugh and a TV miniseries about the case, Dr. Smith was able to get a new trial in 1989. This book was called Echoes in the Darkness. Became a pretty famous TV miniseries starring Peter Coyote.
So he's Dr. J. Smith is saying that this affected him getting an unbiased trial or an unbiased jury.
Yes.
Okay.
Due to the state attorney, Richard Guede, who admitted to using cocaine at the time of Dr. Smith's trial, his sentence was vacated and a new trial granted.
But everybody was using cocaine back then.
Were they? It carried on until 1992. The testimony of the first trial was based on hearsay, and evidence was discovered in one of the detective's possessions that might give Smith an advantage. Smith's sentence was vacated once again, and the prosecution was found to have tried this case with improper conduct.
So they were withholding possibly exculpatory evidence away from the defense. Man, here it is in the 90s. Wow. That's crazy that it's carried over this long.
Dr. Smith was not retried again and lived as a free man. On January 16th of 1998, Bill Bradfield was found unresponsive in his cell. He died of a sudden heart attack. In his cell, Dylan, a single Polaroid picture was found. It was marked from 1986. It was a stone, almost like a marker, in a wooded area. It was just a picture of this weird stone in this wooded area. And people have theorized it was where Karen and Michael Reinert were buried.
Oh my gosh. I wonder if anyone's attempted to find out where this is at.
Ken Reinert passed in 2002 without ever knowing what happened to his children. Dr. J. Smith lived in relative obscurity after 1992, though he did write a few books on the case. He remarried in 2002 and died in 2009. To date, his daughter Stephanie and her husband Eddie have not been found. And they haven't been seen since February of 1978. So it's assumed that Dr. Smith murdered his daughter and her husband.
Well, you have 2 sets of people connected to Dr. Smith, either directly or through, other people's testimony who have disappeared and never been found again. That's rather odd. The children, obviously, and his daughter and son-in-law.
One of the investigators on the case has made public comments. They believe there was likely a third person who was also involved in the murder plot and helped, but who?
Right.
Karen and Michael were declared dead in 1986, and they've not been seen since 1979.
That's sad. I never even took time in this crazy story to consider the children's father, who really had nothing to do with all these other people, right?
I know this was a wild story, and I skipped around a lot, so hopefully you were able to keep up, but it just was the weirdest story I feel like I've ever heard. So many players.
Yeah. And you dig into one, and then you find all this other weird shit that they're into,
Well, and it seems like Bill was going out of his way to set up Dr. Smith as the murderer, discussing it for months, pointing a finger at this man when nothing had happened.
Right.
So then when there was a murder, he could say, "Oh, I told y'all.
I told you.
I was Dr. Smith.
It's Dr. Smith. I was surveilling him from the air."
Now, my resources for today's case, Dylan, were 2 books, Engaged to Murder by Loretta Schwartz Noble and Principal Suspect by William S. Constable.
Principal Suspect. That's a great name for this story.
Now, I have to say, I didn't go into great detail, but I believe it was Principal Suspect. had a lot of information about Dr. Smith. He was a fucking weirdo at this school.
Right.
Like, he would go in his office and lock the door and tell his secretary, like, you're not allowed to bother me. If teachers came and complained to him or had problems, he would just be like, because he was very, very smart, and he would just be such an asshole to them and would use these words that, like, no one would know, these very obscure vocabulary words.
Okay.
And leave them feeling very stupid, and they'd have to, like, go and look up what he was saying, because they were like, they knew he was being condescending, but they didn't even know, like, how he was insulting them, because he was using these, like, very strange and, obscure vocabulary words that, like, no one knows.
Sounds like a great boss.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, he was just super weird.
Yeah. And I mean, all the stuff that, the armed robbery, stuff, and the guns and the weird, it's just the sex stuff around the edges, the dildos, have yet to be explained. I mean, so I don't know. It's like you couldn't even make this story up, honestly.
Well, and he was such a strange, stoic, private, oddball person that it was very hard for people to imagine him being involved in some, like, kinky sex ring. But he was.
Yeah.
I mean, they found letters he'd written to his, girlfriend, who was a principal in New Jersey, and they were nasty. Like, there was no way I could include some of the lines from these letters in our podcast.
Really?
Because they were dirty.
Dang.
Like, I would blush if I had to say those words out loud.
Dr. Smith.
Yeah.
Such an enigma.
So strange.
Well, thank you.
But then he was like this army guy.
Yeah.
And I mean,
respected in the army. Everybody's like he's a good
but
soldier.
it sounds like maybe he wasn't lying. He really might have been a hitman.
I guess we won't ever know the exact truth of this story, right? I mean, the people who know are just unwilling to tell. And I feel like I'm going to be processing this episode for a few days.
Well, it's probably good you have a whole week until we reconvene with a new case.
And so Pennsylvania continues to not disappoint with their stories as we visit this state this month. And last week's was a wild one, the gay porn story. And this week was just, you told me it was something else, but I could have never imagined that this is what you meant.
I have another story lined up for next week, Dylan.
Yeah.
It's also a mind-blowing true crime case.
Jesus.
I have found some bangers in Pennsylvania, and I cannot wait to share them with our listeners.
Pennsylvania's representing.
Yeah.
And thanks once again to the sponsor of today's show, Emily, sponsoring us over there on Patreon. We hope she enjoys the ad-free and extra content.
We are still collecting some listener stories, so if you have something you would like to share with Mountain Murders, please send it to mountainmurderspodcast@gmail.com, and we will read your story on air.
I cannot wait.
Yes.
Now let's go watch a game.
Yeah. Everybody have a great week. Bye.